Welcome, my name is Kara-Leah from the Yoga Lunchbox, and today I am privileged to be interviewing Judith Hanson Lasater. She began teaching yoga in 1971, and she co-founded Yoga Journal in 1975 and wrote for Yoga Journal for 13 years. One of her specialties is restorative yoga, and after becoming a yoga teacher, she went and studied to become a physical therapist, and she also has a PhD in East-West psychology, both of which she did because she wanted to have a deeper understanding that would really improve her yoga teaching and help her to understand more what she was doing with her students. So welcome, Judith.
Oh, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to have this conversation with you.
Now, one thing I didn't mention in the introduction is you are the author of 8 books, and one of the reasons we're talking today is that the second edition of Living Your Yoga has just been released. The first edition came out in 2000. So tell me, why a second edition? What makes this one different?
Well, it's 15 years since 2000. That's about the limit of my math skills. I think it's 15 years. And, I've grown. I'd like to flatter myself that I've grown. I've thought about other things, and I wanted to add 3 new chapters that reflected where I was now in my practice of becoming the yoga and living the yoga. And because I believe that if we stay up in our yoga room and we do the perfect headstand, that doesn't necessarily create the kind of world we want to live in. What makes this practice so valuable is when we live it. When we live ahimsa, when we live karuna, which is compassion, when we become that, when we live that, when we share that, when we choose that, when we raise our children that way. And so we give it away. And the only place we get, quote-unquote, yoga is someone gives it to us. Through a book, through a direct teaching, which I think is the best. Follow quickly by books if my publisher's listening. Videos, whatever, someone hands us this practice. We did not invent it. We did not create it. And so that's what gives it power and helps it live on after centuries and centuries is we share it through our actions and our words, and through, for many of us, our teaching. So the 3 chapters that I picked, 3 topics rather that I picked, one was relaxation, because I believe relaxation, deep resting, is incredibly and increasingly more important, especially in a 9/11 world. And I find that younger people who come to class cannot even lie for 5 minutes without wanting their phone or looking around. Or it's harder and harder, and not just younger people, but all ages really. It's harder and harder to just understand being, and you and I live in doing cultures, and we need to balance that with introversion and silence and spaciousness. That nurtures us, simplicity and silence. So I just spent the afternoon with 3 friends getting rid of about 80% of the stuff in my garage, and I'm telling you, it's fantastic. And it's like exhaling. To relax is to exhale. So I wrote about that, and then I wrote about empathy, because I study nonviolent communication, which is the word, and I studied with Marshall Rosenberg, the originator of it, and a key pillar of the practice of in nonviolent communication is empathy. And because when we can truly see something from someone else's point of view, it changes the dynamic, whether it's sitting around a table, talking about a world problem with world leaders, or in our own intimate relationships. And I define that empathy as understanding independent of agreement. I don't have to agree with you to understand the causes and conditions that our friends the Buddhists say that shaped you to make the decisions and say the things and do the things that you've done. If I can have empathy for that, then we can connect on a human level and we can solve our problems. And then the last one is worship, which I think worship in many countries, not all, traditional worship has not so much the center of lives as it was 100 years ago or more. And for some people it still is. But I have a broad take on worship that to worship is to recognize the sacredness and divinity of everything and every person in every moment. And so the broadest sense of the definition of worship, you can worship in a forest, you can worship and watch the birds soar, there's many ways to feel connected to divinity, to God, to the whole, to goddess, to silence, to stillness, to the fact that this life is nothing but a sacred journey. So those are the 3 chapters that I put in the second edition.
Now I can easily see how relaxation applies to our yoga practice and how worship applies to our yoga practice. But can you expound a little bit on how our yoga practice lived off the mat, how that relates to empathy?
All right, so let's go to the mat first for empathy, if you're willing.
I'm willing.
Okay, so I'm going to speak from my experience. I get on the yoga mat, and what I say to myself often is exhorting myself, like, go further, go more. You're not doing enough. You need to push more. It's this judgment of my practice constantly, and I would never say the things that I say inside my head to you as a teacher, but I would say them to me. And what I've learned to do more of is to say this, what I call a mantra of daily living, which I talk about in the book. Little simple phrases. Now, mantra comes from the word manas, which is the basic thinking brain. And so from manas and then from tra, which means to transcend. So a mantra is something that helps us transcend our ordinary way of thinking. So my mantra of daily living that I like a lot is to say this to myself: how human of me. How human of me to want to improve. How human of me to judge myself. How human of me to want everyone to do what I want them to do right now. That's just what human beings do. And so when I can hold that thought in my practice, I have compassion for myself. And then when I have compassion and softness for myself, which doesn't mean that I don't ask myself to do things that are difficult, but I do it with a soft heart. I don't do it from violence. I practice the most important teaching in yoga to me is ahimsa. And so empathy, understanding that with my background and my, how I was raised and the values I was raised with, like if I came home with 5 subjects and I had 5 A's and 1 B, it was always what happened in that class. It was this, it wasn't an acknowledgement and a celebration of the 4 A's. It was what happened in the course she made the B. And so I inherited this, as many people do, achievement-oriented approach. And yoga is, what we get from yoga is not gettable, if you will, using the strategies we use in the world of going and doing and pushing. And where we make progress internally is when we listen. Is when we soften, is when we evoke and allow and invite the practice into us as the container. And so empathy, if you'll see when you read about it in the book, is the willingness to give myself space without judgment for the thoughts that arise in my mind and not judge that. So sitting on the meditation cushion every morning for a really long time, and not very much anymore, but I would sit there and I would say, oh yes, now I'm really getting it. Oh, now, and I'm going, oh, I shouldn't have that thought. I shouldn't have the thought that I'm getting it. And then I would say, breathe. And then I'd say, no, wait, I shouldn't have the thought that I shouldn't have the thought. I should let whatever is arise. And then I would just stop and say, how human of my mind to do its mind thing. And I can sit next to it or sit with it without trying to make it different. And that comes to me from a sense of empathy for this is what my mind does. This is what comes out of me in this location, in this moment. And I'm not saying I like it, but I'm not fighting with it either. I'm just saying, oh yes, this is what human beings do.
I never considered it like that one could have empathy for oneself, first and foremost.
Well, my dear, I believe that if you don't have empathy for yourself, and I don't have empathy for me, then it's really difficult to have empathy for any other people.
Yeah. That's beautiful. So, what does practice then mean to you? This is, as I listen to you speak, I'm getting a much deeper sense of what it means to do a practice. So how do you define it?
A practice is something that helps you remember the whole. Practice to me is anything that reminds me of divinity, of the whole, of the sacred. And I have a personal mission statement. I actually teach a workshop on this called One True Thing, in which we do asana and pranayama and all that, but we also take some time to figure out what the one true thing is for each of us, and we write it down and we condense it. It's like a personal mission statement. And mine is to facilitate humankind's, which includes me, to facilitate humankind's remembrance of the sacred. Because I think if we know that we're all connected, physicists tell us that there is no separation, just a big sea of electrons, that a wall is an illusion, that if we could see it on another level, you'd see it's just space. And so there is no there, there's only here, there's no other, there's only us. And so when we get to that mystical kind of glimpses, then we see that there's no separation. And so to practice is to remember yourself, to remember. It can be really simple, like just remembering to breathe. I've spent many days practicing this. Whenever I could, remember my diaphragm and let go of it. And every single time, I've done this for years, off and on, at different times. Every time I thought about my diaphragm, it was tight. To remember to let go, to stop defending, to be present. And so practice can be an asana, it can be listening to music, it can be pranayama, it can be meditation, it can be lying on the floor and just being there, it can be having a delicious interaction with nature or with a child. It can be, I write poems, and sometimes I feel when I wake up and a poem has come to me, it's a form of reminding myself of the whole.
So when you first started practicing yoga, were you predominantly practicing asana, or did you start from a more holistic form of practice? Like, when did your yoga go off the mat? Was it just always like that?
No, it wasn't always like that. I had a job. I was in graduate school in another, totally unrelated area, and I didn't want to do another year of teaching assistantship, so I wandered over to the street that was right alongside the university that had the coffee shops and the bookstores and that, and there was a job in the YMCA, Student Y. I walked in there and I said, I'm looking for a job for next fall, and they all just stopped and looked at me and said, how did you know we were looking for someone? And I'm like, I'd never been in there. Fate just took me in there. Anyway, so I got the job. They had a yoga program that had started a few months before that, and I got to take the yoga classes free. So I wanted to dance again, and I was having some arthritis in my joints, so I thought, I'll take this yoga stuff. I didn't know that it wasn't, I kind of knew it wasn't lying on nails, but I wasn't much far past that. So I went to this yoga class, and we would do a pose and then lie down in between, and I'm so agitated, like, why are we lying here? Wasting all this time. We're productive. But anyway, I loved it. It just, the next morning, literally, I got up and I did whatever I remembered. And then I started looking for books. That's always what I've done because I like the life of the mind a lot. And I started reading about it, and I embraced every part of it. The devotional part, the chanting, the pranayama. That was started in September of 1970, and I went to class every day. And by July, my 2 teachers moved away, and they said, will you take over the classes? So in 10 months of practice, no training of any kind, there wasn't really any, I took over a 200-person yoga program. And I'll tell you the story of my first class. I went in, and I sat down. We had these little carpets, and we wore these white cotton yoga pants, and the lights were turned off, and it was all very slow and soft. And I thought, oh my God, what have I done? What am I going to say for a full hour? And then I said, okay, what have you learned to do when you feel anxious or you panicked? Breathe. So I sat there, I closed my eyes, I took some breaths, and I got the very strong, visceral, kinesthetic experience of my 2 teachers standing behind me, and then immediately their teacher, who was Swami Vishnu-Devananda, behind them, and then all the way back into infinity, a long line of teachers. And I just smiled, and I thought, hey, I'm not doing anything, I'm just passing the water bucket. And so I started teaching, and I always followed my heart, and I always loved my students. And, then I met, a few years later, I met B.K. Iyengar, and I got very involved in that. But I love asana, and I've done it virtually every day of my life, except when I was in labor and things like that. But it's not enough. It is a program of ethical behavior, asana, which begins to, they're all about focusing techniques, like focus on your interactions with other people, the yamas. Focus on what your intention and your motivation is, the niyamas. Focus on the physical sensation, because when you focus on a stretch in your hamstrings, you're not doing anything else. You're not anywhere else. Pranayama even more so. And then pratyahara, which is as we know, the conscious withdrawal from the senses. Notice how you're drawn outward from yourself, how you lose yourself, which means you forget God, you forget yourself. And then dharana, dhyana, samadhi, which, a focused, really one-pointed focus, and then dhyana, which to me is like you focus on everything at once, you're in stillness and in presence, and then samadhi, in which you finally understand and become integrated, body, mind, and soul in this moment. And so it's hard for me to say, but I do know this one thing. When I was in labor with my first child, I was 30 years old. I had been practicing for 6 years. And they found out that my pelvis was too small to let the baby out. And I had a very large husband and a very fat, juicy baby. And so I'm the kind of woman that would like to just go in the backyard and squat under a tree and have a baby. Really simply, and, quietness and all of that. But it was turning out I was going to have a cesarean section, which I like to call cesarean birth because it's a human birth. And it was going to be in a hospital with bright lights and everything that I didn't want. And so I had this thought. Time literally slowed down, and I saw in front of me 2 paths. And I could go on the path of resistance. I could think of the doctors as others. I could think of myself as a failure. I could fight them all along. I could I could go that way. And I saw in my mind's eye what that created in the world, and the vibration for the baby and the people around me who were, everyone's Buddha. And so instead of seeing, I could have gone that way, and then I saw the opposite. And I said, God has sent these angels to help me give birth to my baby. And it's not what I wanted, but it's what I'm getting. And I can also go that way. I can choose it. I mean, literally, time practically felt like it stood still, and I could weigh both of them, and I could see, years down the road and how it just spreads out, the karma of it. Mm-hmm. And I said, okay, what the discipline of asana has taught me is I can choose the second path. Mm. I can choose the good. Mm. And so that was in 1977. I guess I've been practicing 7 years. Mm-hmm. And that's when I really saw that the asana was a metaphor. That the asana was a question. Go into Trikonasana, feel the stretch that is a little bit uncomfortable, and what is your intention? What is your choice? It focuses you on discomfort so you can choose now. Do I breathe? Do I come up? Do I do less? Do I just stay here? Mm. Asana is helping us see the choice that we always have in every moment to leave some scars like footprints on the beach of our body, mind, and soul. And that everything that I do and say, from a small decision to a large decision, spreads out in the world. Everything you do or say, it all flows because it's all one pond. Mm-hmm. There's no way to create a ripple in the pond that doesn't go everywhere. The universe is a big pond, and so what am I choosing? What is my intention in this moment? And so it kind of all flowed from that moment. Mm.
Do you think, though, that in our modern yoga classes that people are having an experience where they are learning that we have choices in each moment, where they are getting yoga on that level, or are they just getting how to do handstand?
Well, how much trouble do I want to get into?
It's a troublesome question, isn't it?
I have two minds with it, because when I was young and in my 20s, I'm 68 years old. I do elbow stands. I do, I'm not your typical 68-year-old. But when I was in my 20s, it was so much about the movement, the achievement. Oh, look what I can do now. I can do this. I can bring my toes to my head. And it was about the movement and not about the stillness. So I think that a mature student understands that the asana is not the yoga. Mm-hmm. It's the residue that the asana leaves in our body, mind, and spirit. That is yoga. Because yoga is really defined as two things. And in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, in the first 3 sutras, he talks about that. The second sutra, Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha, yoga is a state of dissolution or solution or resolution of our agitation. And then the third verse says, Tada drushtahu svarbevashtanam, and then the seer abides in its own true nature. Then we know who we are really. And so it's a state of being yoga. And Pada 2, second chapter, the practices associated with that. And we confuse the asana for the yoga. We confuse the breath for the yoga. We confuse the form of meditation for it's the residue. What is left in me?
So then what is our job as yoga teachers? Like when yoga teachers are out in front of the class, what are we really called upon to teach?
I think that when we stand on the mat in the role of teacher, the first thing I do silently is to remember what an incredible responsibility and privilege it is to teach people to find themselves, to create an environment in which people find their highest, best selves. Mm-hmm. And I think the number one job of a yoga teacher is to mirror back the inner wisdom and basic goodness of each human being, regardless of who they are. Everyone's the Atman, and to reflect that back and to create an environment in which people discover their own goodness. Mm-hmm. And you have to find your own goodness before you can do that. You have to believe in your own inner wisdom. So to stand on our mat with an open heart and soft eyes and soft ears to hear what they say, and teach them our truth, not the truth, because no one has the truth. I think God is that entity that sees all points of view at once. Mm-hmm. But you have your truth, I have my truth, because it's filtered through a system that's influenced by our parents and our culture and our religion and our astrology and our gender and our, you name it, our training. And so, and our proclivities, we have emotional DNA that we get from our families, just like physical DNA. So we speak, I believe, our job is to speak our truth, what we know in ourselves, and offer it as a devotional act to these other beings in a way that makes their life more wonderful and offers them the possibility of no longer being a prisoner of the thoughts. And this is why I really believe, one of the reasons that, and I talk about this, I think, in the relaxation chapter in Living Your Yoga, the new edition, is that this is why I think Shavasana is so important. Not just for the physiological relaxation. To me, that's not Shavasana. Physiological relaxation, measurable heart rate, blood gases, blood pressure, respiratory rate, all the brain waves that you could measure from the scientific part of your brain, you could measure that. But that is the precursor to Shavasana. That Shavasana doesn't start until you're relaxed. They're not the same. I don't conflate them. So it takes 10 minutes or 15 minutes for people to really relax. And then you have the spontaneous sense of moving inward. And it's where you lose ambition. And you hear a sound, but it doesn't draw you out. You're just at the bottom of a well, and your body just feels, you don't differentiate your arms and legs, and you just feel this warm heaviness on the floor, and you feel this complete letting go. That's a pratyahara state. And that's what Shavasana is. And people who tell me they don't want to do Shavasana, like it agitates them, have never gotten to that state, the second level. They've never gotten, you know the state I'm talking about.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, when you get that, you want that again. Anyway, so that's Shavasana. And what happens when we do that, and why I think it's so critically important, especially in Western cultures, perhaps slightly more, is that, one, you are taught disidentification with your thoughts. And I think the most important thing any human being can learn, I think the most important thing that any human being can teach, is the possibility of disidentification with the thoughts. So, because all suffering comes from believing our thoughts. And it's not that we say, I never teach calm your mind, because the mind's job is to create thoughts, and scientists tell us 60,000 thoughts a day. Most of them, mind generates thoughts like your skin generates sweat. It's just what it does, but I don't have to dance with them. So, and I think for many people, to lie them down on the floor, get them relaxed, hopefully get them in that second state, and you can say, watch the thoughts rise and fall like the waves on the ocean. So you begin to create the witness, and you see, and that carries forth in your life. There's that thought of jealousy. There's that thought of fear. There's this thought arising. I noticed that thought. And that's the beginning of true moksha, of freedom, is not to be at the mercy of our thoughts. And the Dalai Lama was once asked, as someone I respect greatly, you're a man, have you ever in your youth, or do you now ever see a beautiful woman walking across the room? Do you ever feel lust? He said, yeah. I don't act on it, and I watch it rise and fall. So freedom, that's what I want to teach. To me, it's a mental practice, not an intellectual one. And I remember one day, I used to have, for many years, I had an intermediate class from 9:30 to 11:30, and then I had a beginner, advanced beginner, my favorite level in yoga, advanced beginner, advanced for your ego and beginner for reality. But, experienced beginners and beginners together. So, and that class followed next, and so people would come, teachers would come to my first class. I always called it intermediate, because I never knew any advanced yogis. So, that Mr. Reinhardt. So, I would teach that class, and then 3 or 4 of the people my senior students, they would stay and assist in the second class. So one day I taught the first class, and I kept saying to these very experienced yoga students, this is purely a physical practice. Stop spinning in your mind metaphors and theories and philosophy and psychology just like that. Just give up the mind trip. Just feel the sensation in your body. Feel the body. Feel the sensation in the breathing, how the pressure changes in your abdomen and your ribs move. It's physical sensation. It took them so inward. And then the very next class, and there were 5 or 6 of them there, and I was teaching these beginners, I would say, I said to them, this is not a physical practice. Watch your resistance. Mm-hmm. Watch your attachment, what you love, what you hate. I can say back bends and some of you are happy and others of you are, oh no. I can say forward bends and it flip-flops. Notice how easy your mind is manipulated from the outside. It's totally a mental practice. And of course the people who have been in the were like, what? You just said it wasn't so...
I want to talk about this, Judith, because this is something I've been contemplating in the last 2 months, is that yoga teaching is inherently contextual, and that when a teaching is given, it is applicable to the student in that moment at that time. And it feels to me in the modern yoga world that because we live in a social media world and the internet, etc., that the teachings are extracted from their context and handed out as if they are always true. And you've just perfectly demonstrated that, haven't you, with the anecdote you just told?
Yes. So, but you see, when I said that to me to stand on the mat in your own light and teach from your own truth is to teach what you believe and know in that moment. Mm. Yes, we need, and I always say an inward namaste to all my teachers before I teach and afterwards. I mean, I didn't make this up. I've only been teaching for 44 years. Yoga's been around for thousands. It's like I'm a beginner on my mat every day. Mm-hmm. And so I begin again every moment, every day. I start. And so I think that we're training teachers to teach information and not from their hearts. And I know my favorite moments are in a yoga class when I'm teaching, and I hope to have at least one every class, sometimes more than one. I will open my mouth and I will say something that I never consciously thought before. That really, I call it plugging into the cosmic grid. And I almost want to say, somebody write that down. And I call it, plugging into the cosmic grid. I'm like connected to something beyond me. And I totally trust that intuitive moment. And people will say, that's exactly what I needed to hear today. Because I am willing to not know when I step on the mat exactly everything I'm going to say or do. Mm-hmm. And I think it's partly, if I may be so immodest, it's partly maturity in teaching. And that when I studied with B.K. Iyengar, I came back and just copied his words. And just said it, and I had to be like him. Because I had to learn it, But then there comes a time when you have to find just like a child leaves home for college, you have to find your own truth, your own way of expressing how you dress, how you wear your hair, what life's but it's the same thing in yoga. A mature teacher teaches from their own experience, not by following even the text. Ramana Maharshi, great sage in, I guess, 1900s or late 1800s, he talked about this, and I was raised in Texas, and so we had these things called sticker burrs. They were burrs, if you'd walk through the grass, they would stick on your clothes. Mm-hmm. And the ones out on your skin or on your socks or something. And he used to say that the books are nothing, that the tradition is nothing, but that if you have a burr stuck in you, the burr of avidya, the burr of maya, the burr of not seeing your true nature, you take this other burr called sutras and teachers and philosophies and wisdom, and you use that second burr to pull the first one out. Mm-hmm. So I like that story. And I find that I am more satisfied. I have a deeper connection with myself myself and my students, rather, and when I teach it, it might be I've discovered the wheel on my mat, and I go running to my class and I say, I've discovered the wheel. Other people have discovered the wheel, obviously, but when I teach it from my integrity, from what I know, it has power to change people's lives. And I think it's so important to trust yourself first. This is what I tell my teachers. I say, trust yourself first. And I make them say it out loud 3 times. They roll their eyes. We're not in the 2nd grade. Because I tell them, look, I make mistakes all the time, but I'm happier living with the mistakes that I make from trusting myself than the mistakes I make from not trusting myself and listening to my inner wisdom. And the more we cultivate that, we need to teach teachers. I think we need a 2-prong approach. And I always make this clear in my classes. I'm now talking from my scientist brain about the physiology, about the anatomy, which I love. I'm an anatomy geek. Now I'm teaching from traditional wisdom, which is coming from my right hemisphere intuitive self. And I don't mix them up. I try to keep it clear when I'm teaching. Where I'm not going to say to them, shoulder stand is good for the thyroid gland. Because it's good for the thyroid. Well, I haven't seen any definitive research that proves that. But and I'll say this exact thing. I don't know any studies that I like the protocol enough to say definitively that's true. But in experience and in traditional wisdom, there is a belief that shoulder stand and halasana can help the functioning of the thyroid. So if you have a sluggish thyroid, let's try that and see what happens. But I'm not telling you from double-blind studies in a Western context that this is going to work. But I've seen it help people, and let's try. So I try to be clear. And one last point on this. There's a word now, and I don't know if you have it there. It's been a while since I've been to New Zealand. I taught in Tasmania, and I taught in Australia, I taught in New Zealand. Is that Q, C-U-E. So I'll teach them something, let's say, about Parvita Trikonasana, about letting go of the organs and twisting in that twisted standing pose from the organs, not the backbone, and let the backbone ride and on the organs and let them create the movement like the red stripes around a barber pole. Like you move from your core, from your center, or something, whatever blah blah I'm saying at the moment.
Yeah.
And I would say, tell us how to cue that. Them with soft eyes and a soft heart. And I said, no. Go home and practice it. You've got the image and the seed of it. Go practice it for 3 weeks. It's almost like they'll say, tell me how to cue that, and they don't say this, but I fill in the blanks out of my own judgment. So I'll have something new to teach tonight. Instead of focusing on, have this experience, this thought, this sensation in your body, and follow it on your mat. And see where it leads you, and then teach it from your perspective, not from me giving you a dialogue, say these 3 things.
That's the key difference, though, isn't it, between, like you say, just teachers that are taught to share information and then teachers who teach out of their lived experience. That's an experiential sharing of what happens for them on the mat when they live their yoga.
Well, I heard this once, and I think it makes a lot of sense, and maybe it's a good place to draw to a close if you're content to do that. That there are 4 levels of teachers. Now, all these judgments, these are all judgments from the mind, but they have a grain of truth in them, so if I may share. There's a leader, and a leader just says, follow me. I've even seen yoga teachers do their own practice in front of the room, or turn their backs on their students and just do it and have the students follow them, and that's leading. And then there's teaching, and the jump from leading to teaching is the teacher looks at you and says, turn your right foot more to the left, and the person next to you, now you turn yours to the right. They individualize the practice. They see the person and what that person needs in this moment, right? And then there's the master teacher, and there are master teachers of all kinds of things, not just spiritual disciplines, but the master teacher teaches you about your life using the technique of whatever they're teaching. My piano teacher teaches me about life. So people will then say to that level of yoga teacher, they won't say to the you have the leader, and then you have the teacher. What they'll say to the teacher is, oh, that's the best trikonasana I ever did. That feels better. But then to the master, the next level, they'll say, your words helped me sit by my mother's bed when she was dying. I remembered what you said. Mm. You have made my life better. My life is better with you in it. You've changed my life. You've opened my heart. And that's a different level of teaching. Mm-hmm. And then there's the guru. And the guru doesn't teach you anything because the guru is it. The guru is the message. So the guru just sits up there, tells these really bad jokes, which he thinks are really funny, and everyone's laughing at him, not with him. And he just makes jokes, and he smiles at you, and, he'll say wonderful things, but he's not busy teaching you. You're taking darshan. Darshan means from drish, to see with the inner eye. Taking darshan with someone is not what they say. It's like he's the first violin, and he's tuning, and you're another violin in the orchestra, and you're tuning to his vibration. Mm-hmm. You're matching his vibration. Each of these are deeper levels of teaching from the inner self.
Yeah, I get it. The last one's like that transmission of energy when nothing needs to be said, but
it's Shaktipat. It's like, and I had a little of that experience with Iyengar, and just a baby experience of it. Like, he would say, take me, like he would show things on different people. And it happened the second time I went to India, and we would be doing a pose, and he'd want us to teach us something about it. And he would come up to me, and before he said anything or even touched me, I did what he wanted. I just knew what he wanted. Mm. And he said once that beginning students need a touch, intermediate, beginning students need a touch, intermediate students just need a word, but it's senior students. Let me say it again, because I'm not sure I'm being as clear as I would like. Okay, 3 steps. He said, the beginning student needs a touch. The intermediate student needs a word, and the advanced student or the experienced student just needs a look. Mm. And that was kind of what it was like. Like you got it in different ways as you became more receptive to the teacher, which takes time and years of trust. So I want what I'd like to contribute in my short life and the few years I have left teaching is I want to contribute to yoga teachers all at least being teachers and seeing the body and seeing the person and connecting with the person and teaching them about how they can move in a way and breathe in a way and use these techniques in a way to help them immediately. And in that way, act from really high values, but also act in a Western context from a lot of really good training and a really good understanding of how the body moves and the nature of the student-teacher relationship and boundaries and the psychology, and know something about the history of yoga and the language of yoga and the philosophy of yoga, so they could be the whole package as teachers. And I think if I could wave my magic wand, heck, if I could find my magic wand, I would say to be a yoga teacher, you would need the equivalent of 4 years college. To be to train teachers, you need a master's. And to use yoga, asana, and pranayama, and psychology and philosophy therapeutically, you need a PhD. That's the level of depth if I can put it in a Western construct that I want to promote and support yoga teachers in that, because I think that the work we do is the most important work in the world. That is creating a space for people to find themselves in this short life. I'm not saying that we are important. And sometimes I've found in the yoga world that sometimes people get those confused and they begin to think it's about them as a teacher. And I think we start to lose it when we do that. We cannot believe our press releases. We cannot We cannot put our faith in fame. Buddha said fame is the last attachment to go. And actually, young teachers come to me. They say, how do I become a famous yoga teacher? Mm-hmm. And I'm dumbfounded. Thank God when I started there was no concept of that. It was just practice. Mm-hmm. Do this practice. Share with anybody that will sit there for 5 minutes and do it with you. And there was no sense of being famous. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Do you understand?
Yeah, it's a crazy yoga world in many ways.
Yeah, it is. But it's always been a crazy world because human beings have always inhabited it.
Yeah, for sure. Judith, thank you so much for sharing so generously of your depth and your wisdom. I haven't read your whole book, and I'm really excited to get my hands onto the second edition, which is out now. Are you planning to come to New Zealand anytime in the near future?
Unfortunately, no, but I have to tell you that New Zealand is one of my most favorite places I've ever been. And when I came back from there, people said, what's New Zealand like? And I said, it's like the United States in the 50s, all the good things about the 50s and none of the bad. People are friendly, they're open, they take care of themselves and the environment and the food, and it's just a very pleasant place to be. So, and I want to say something to you. I want to appreciate you for this work that you do to help share my work, of course, but certainly other people's work that can really affect people through this magical media that we have now, this external nervous system called the internet, that connects us all so closely, visually and auditorially, and that I know that to do the work you do takes competence, it takes focus, it takes knowledge, and it sometimes takes sacrifice. And it's sometimes hard, and it's sometimes not rewarding, and it's sometimes frustrating, and yet you keep doing it, and I want to appreciate you for that, because I think you're performing a great service.
Thank you, Judith.
You're welcome. So I'd like to say, as my final thing, a sentence that I say at the end of all my classes. I'd like to say, may we live like the lotus, at home in the muddy water. Namaste.
Namaste.